All right. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Aiden Gowland, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the EDI committee, along with Claudia and Briar. Um, and yeah, I'll hop into it so that this doesn't take as long as it could take. Um, we're gonna go over these results, and then we're gonna have a chance to discuss them. Um, the key thing to take away from this is that these results are kind of a snapshot of time. And the moment that they are a snapshot of is, more than 3 years ago now. Um, so there are going to be differences, obviously, between the survey results and kind of what you might feel is the situation now. Even if you participated in the survey, you might think, oh man, I remember that question and how I answered, and I would have answered that differently today. That's okay. It gave us some really good baseline data, and as you'll see later on, we have been working off of this data, even though it's taken us a long time to compile these results and to share them with you. So in late 2021, between October and November, we gave members 1 month to respond to a pretty comprehensive survey that was meant to get a better understanding for all of the CHS, but especially committees, about folks' diversity, the barriers that people face, as well as the need for future programs, initiatives, and support. It was still the pandemic, so many people were still voluntarily or involuntarily in quarantine. A lot of people were out of work in weird situations when they wouldn't normally be out of work. Um, yeah, the ramifications were just kind of extensive, as we all know. Uh, that means that the responses were almost certainly different than they would be today, especially around things like employment, disability, um, and finances. The last thing I'll mention about that is that the EDI committee is made up of a very, well, not a very, but a small number of us. Um, and it's predominantly composed of people who are facing the barriers that are described in the survey. So it has taken us a long time to produce this, and that is for a lot of reasons. The survey had 116 responses, and there were around 375 members in 2021. So um, it's a pretty good response rate given that typical conference attendance is around 100 people. Um, I think, yeah, that shows that it's important to folks that, everyone who participated really wanted to have an input and felt it was important to provide that information. 92% completed the survey in English, 4% in French, and then 3% in English and French. And as you can see from the map here, there was a strong Ontario bias. That's not surprising. Um, I think anytime anything happens in Canada, unless it's regional, there tends to be a strong Ontario bias just because there are more folks. So not surprising, but just something to keep in mind as you think about the results. And yeah, the way we'll go through this is kind of question by question so that you kind of see the raw data in some ways. Uh, I think that's probably the most useful. The first question we asked was around gender identity, or it might not be the first we asked, but it's the first in the presentation. The majority of respondents were identifying as cis women, so um, that is kind of unusual for STEM. STEM typically reports an underrepresentation of women, so the CHS is challenging that. 4% identified as transgender or non-binary. To me, that reflects a fairly high amount of trust in the survey amongst the membership. In my experience, STEM fields are usually seen as kind of these unsafe spaces and generally have very low self-reporting by um, trans participants. So I think that's pretty good. Um, yeah. Uh, Sexuality and sexual orientation. 30% responded that they identify as something other than heterosexual. obviously that then means that nearly 70% identified as heterosexual. But we kind of gave as many options as we could that would allow for us to easily analyze the data, and as you can see, people kind of did fit into each of the categories that we provided. Um, Throughout the survey, several respondents shared that their sexual orientation has been a source of discrimination professionally, academically, and socially within, the broad HERP community, not just the CHS. But it was also identified as a source of discrimination within the CHS. Um, Education, this is kind of one of the key ones, I think, around programming, and if you're thinking of giving a conference talk or anything like that, 34% of respondents were first generation student, or sorry, post-secondary student or graduate. The majority of members have at least one degree. Most, so 51%, have completed both a master's and a PhD. On the other side of things, 40% of folks have up to a bachelor's, and then 5% of members have not pursued post-secondary education. When we get into age, that might help explain some of that. We basically didn't give folks an option to identify if they were under 18. And so we're kind of expecting that some of those folks who haven't pursued post-secondary might still be in high school or had been in 2021. Um, yeah. Employment is another a big one. Um, this was almost certainly affected by COVID. It's hard to imagine that it wasn't. Um, but even given the conditions of COVID, 79% of respondents said they were currently working in herpetology. The largest group of those were working, or sorry, largest group overall were working in established and permanent positions. And almost a quarter of the membership were early career or contract to contract. Um, this, as I say, was almost certainly affected by COVID. Fieldwork canceled, academic institutions shifting to online and reduced courses, organizations kind of forced to shut down entirely, but we're still seeing, that almost 80% working in her stuff. Um, Ethnicity, nationality, race. Most members call Canada home, but along with that, others identified home as kind of being further afield. So China, Poland, Austria, Argentina, regardless of where they live now, these were places that they also identified as being home. Uh, as well as, um, I don't know why I started that sentence that way. Uh, Turtle Island was also identified as home, which I think is a good reminder that the lands on and with which we live, work, and study are kind of known by many names, and have had relationships with the humans and non-humans here for a lot longer than they've been known as Canada. So, um, yeah. Um, this it gives a breakdown of kind of what communities people identified with. Uh, so the responses show that how am I gonna yeah, basically around shared experiences or such as national and ethnic identity or um how the communities they feel comfortable in. Uh Most members in 2021 at least self-identified as white and or of European descent. Um and then the next biggest category was indigenous. Language is another big piece for us, especially as we think about making sure that things are available to everybody in at least one of the two official languages. We uh only asked people for whether they were comfortable in English, French, and Spanish. We didn't include any other languages, unfortunately. Um, so this isn't a good snapshot of all the languages people speak, but this is a good snapshot of what they're comfortable in as far as official communications. Most respondents were comfortable only in English. No respondents were comfortable only in French, but many felt comfortable navigating kind of in either language. With that said, the provision of CHS materials only in English was identified as a problem, a barrier for feeling included and feeling appreciated in the society. And that's something that we've really worked hard to fix since the survey took place. Age. So 77% of members were under the age of 45 in 2021, which was surprising to me. I don't know if it's surprising to more folks, but that was an interesting thing for me. However, we did accidentally create an overlap. So 36-year-olds could uh get stuck, not stuck, but you could choose to be either 31 to 36 or 36 to 40. Um, so there's a split there, but it doesn't affect the overall kind of that 77 under 45 piece. And again, we didn't create a category for under 18. So if you are out there, we're sorry. Yeah. Um, but again, this data might help explain some of those education and employment numbers as well. Religion and spirituality, the chart for this was not useful, so I didn't put it up, but most members identified as atheist or agnostic. There were some other folks represented, but um, mostly atheist or agnostic. Others were pagans, Catholics, indigenous spiritual tradition upholders, Buddhists, Hindus, and Unitarian Universalists. Yeah. Experience of disability. So there's kind of a flow chart there that hopefully is readable. Um, Basically, we ask people, do they experience a disability? And then kind of to categorize what that disability is. They could multi-select. It didn't have to just be one. Um, so 40% of respondents do experience living with a disability. So 40% of folks in the CHS are, in that group of people. And 12% of those felt that their disability had led to them feeling excluded professionally or recreationally in herping. That will come up again a little later as well. Um, uh, yeah, not everyone found these categories super helpful, but most people were able to fit into one of those. One person wrote age, declining everything. That makes sense. Doesn't fit cleanly into one of the categories, and also kind of reminds us that our identities don't exist in isolation and they overlap, right? Like the overlap between age and disability. Um, so this is interesting. So we asked of folks who did experience disability, one of the other kind of sub questions to that was um, to provide examples of barriers that prevented them from participating in herping in general, so not just in the CHS. We got a lot more than just comments on disability, which is great. It's super helpful. It was just a surprise that people used that question in that way. But as I say, great because that information is really helpful. Um, yeah, so members have been experiencing barriers that range from stigma or ignorance around disability to being marginalized based on race, sexuality, gender identity, sexism. Um, yeah, I'll give you a moment to kind of read through some of those. They're not uh I would not say, at least in my experience of kind of working in the EDI sphere and the anti-oppression and kind of um training sphere, I wouldn't say that these are unique by any stretch to CHS. And you know, just because, one person puts them on a survey doesn't mean it, represents all the experiences that that individual has had or that people similar to that individual have had. Um, and the other thing to say about this slide is just that these comments that were included, my barrier of like, do I include it on the slide or not, was very low. It was just, um, did they mention these things? Like, was there a specific comment to include? Um, yeah. Financial barriers, again, definitely affected by COVID. Hard to imagine that it wasn't. 78% didn't ex didn't report experiencing financial barriers, 22% did. Um, I'd be interested to know if that has shifted lately. Um, but having said that, the biggest barriers for CHS activities specifically were travel and accommodation costs. Um, but on the other hand, the membership initiative that provides free membership to folks from underrepresented demographics has was specifically identified as being helpful, uh, and especially for those experiencing other barriers, so disability or childcare related barriers. The cost of traveling to and attending CHS related activities was not always an issue, but the additional costs associated with bringing a caregiver to accompany them or hiring someone to provide childcare back home were prohibitive. So kind of, I mean, I guess that's self-explanatory, but the costs, the on-paper costs of attending a conference aren't high, but then when you add in the fact that, there are additional care requirements necessary, that adds up. Speaking of caregiving, almost 30% of members are responsible for children all or some of the time. So that's a third of the membership who are trying to navigate childcare and CHS activities and the rest of their lives. 15% were responsible for providing care to adults, some or all of the time. And then of those who were responsible for caregiving, 6% care for both adults and children, either some or all of the time. Um, these caregiving responsibilities, as I said, can really create barriers to finances, but also around logistics and scheduling, right? That's going to affect, can you participate in committees? Can you do the work that you have committed to with that committee? All of that stuff kind of gets wrapped up there. Um, so around herping and CHS specifically, fieldwork was an activity particularly fraught with barriers across a range of identities and kind of lines of oppression. Um, so this part again, not surprising, or yeah, taken in context with other organizations, this is pretty standard, but made more difficult because of the heavy fieldwork requirement in herping in general. But people experiencing disability, as well as those who identified as queer or trans, expressed that they've been directly and indirectly excluded from um, recreational and professional herping, and safety was usually a pretty big concern for those folks. Um, specific barriers to the CHS from across the survey were difficulty connecting, socializing, and networking in large groups or with older, more experienced individuals. There was the a noted inaccessibility of conferences, so a lack of closed captioning, that kind of thing. Um, Sexist, homophobic, and transphobic culture was mentioned, as well as travel and accommodation costs to attend conferences. And as you'll see as we continue, um, we've done across the CHS a lot of work around several of those. So we have been using the survey results. Barriers are intersectional. Hopefully that's not a new concept, but many respondents who were experiencing one kind of barrier identified themselves as experiencing one or more additional barriers. And kind of as we went through the survey and looked at the individual responses, we could see that um, barriers in multiple areas were coming up for the same person often. Multiple people, but yes, for each person experiencing a barrier, there were more barriers. Um, Axes of oppression and identity intersect, right? So as I said before, disability and age, there are all kinds of these overlapping identities, and solutions have to account for that and treat people holistically. Um, so how we're using this data, finally. Um, we have started a mentorship program. So you likely saw that at the last CHS conference, and I think the one before, but Claudia can speak to that for sure because that's kind of her baby. Um, Free EDI, no, that's wrong. Free CHS membership initiative for underrepresented groups, as I talked about. We started that just before the survey, and then the survey kind of confirmed that that was helpful. An anonymous submission box for folks to reach out anonymously and let us know if there are any issues and um, have that dealt with appropriately. That is, yeah, a thing that is happening. Bilingual translation of CHS documents and web page and the web page from English to French. There's a slight delay on the web page, but I hope that folks will see that a lot of CHS communications are being provided as translations as well. Whether they start in French and are moved to English or vice versa. Um, we've got this fantastic virtual only conference that's happened a couple of years. We've also got the in-person conference, which we're, adding a lot of hybrid components and also improving the in-person experience for folks who have disabilities. Um, we have created new ways and altered old ways of subsidizing in-person conference fees for invited speakers and volunteers. And um, I could I might have, yeah, I think that's correct. And then we're also working on, conference bursaries and awards. Um, the biggest way that we're trying to navigate the financial aspect of conferences is by keeping that conference price low across the board and then creating tiered costs based on financial situation. Having LGBTQ socials at CHS conferences. We introduced last conference in Sydney a new thing where EDI members serve as sentinels or the first point of contact for issues that happen at CHS conferences. So having that trusted person that you can quickly and easily identify and then go up to and just say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute about something that happened yesterday? Um, and then people in society leadership roles being screened for homophobic comments and conduct. And then providing hopefully more EI related training and resources. Um, I will go back to this slide when we open it up for discussion, but in the meantime, I'm going to get to the exciting question. At the end of the survey, we asked what people's favorite herps were. Um, I can't remember. I think we definitely did, looking at the numbers. We allowed for multiple selection. Um, so yes, I don't know why it's almost a perfect kind of exponential pyramid, but it is. Um, and I think it's because of all of you damn turtle folks. Finally, we've got a heck of a lot of acknowledgements. I just could not have presented this specifically presented this without the fantastic help of Claudia and Briar. And then Cindy, Gabby, both worked incredibly hard on helping us sort through the results and providing some fantastic support around analysis and around organization and making sure that things made sense. And then, current and former EDI committee members, because this has taken place over a few years, we're in a situation now where that's a lot of people to thank. So if you were a part of this at any point, thank you. And there have been a lot of eyes on this data and on these results over that time. So we have a fairly high confidence in the validity of what we're saying, because there have been a lot of people looking at it and asking questions. Um, and yeah. I'm gonna look at the chat in case. So Lita saying,
Hey,
oh yeah,
yeah, thanks, Aiden. Here, I do. If you want me to summarize, I can. We don't have questions yet, but are you ready for questions?
I am ready. Let me go back to that slide. Sorry, I'm a slow reader, so it took me a second. And my brain
Sorry about that.
also have
I was
ADHD.
on me.
No, that's fine. I also have ADHD, so sometimes my brain just like forgets it's doing something, and so it went from like presenting to reading and was like, we're not presenting anymore.
No, sorry about that. The mute
No.
button got in my way again. So there's a link in the chat already for questions that you can submit anonymously that I think Briar is the one who has specific access to. And I said you can also, if you are okay without being anonymous, you can put your questions in the chat. You can also use your react button at the bottom of the screen, and you can raise your hand and we can call on you. But yeah, we have the one comment that Lita put in the chat that when her daughter was young, but when Lita and Fred's daughter was young, she always said the scientific meetings were some of her favorite events. And so we should encourage kids to come with parents or caregivers to meetings, which I love that comment. I know for the conferences I've been part of planning, the biggest reason that more hasn't been offered to help with kids is capacity. We haven't had enough people that feel like they have enough time to dedicate to figuring out how to get childcare services available for the conference. But it is something that's been brought up as like CHS hasn't done this yet that I know of, but it's an option. And so if you have time to help with conference planning and things like that, then that can really help with that one.
And I would say too that, someone on the board can correct me if I'm wrong, but if a conference is local to you, and that childcare aspect is less of it, like if you need to bring your kid during the day and have your kid sit in sessions, like I expect that will be fine. Um, Obviously, if it's not, and even if it's not local to you, like, and you want to do that, like I don't think we're a society where like we're gonna be upset because someone brought their kid to a session, right? Or like all the sessions. Again, like there are socials and things, and if like that's where it gets to be a personal thing of like, what are you gonna do? But yeah, um,
We have had babies at conferences before.
I figured that was probably the case.
Yeah, it's not, as somebody with a baby, it's not an easy decision to make
Yes.
or manage.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, yeah.
But yeah, we won't kick them out. We will not.
Yeah. Yeah. And like
Never.
I taught a course with one of the students had a baby, and I think it's something you get used to pretty quickly. Not the parent, probably. I haven't been in that situation, but like a person speaking, like I think it is less disruptive than you might think it is. So like,
Mhm.
and it's great to kind of have kids getting access to this stuff early. So yeah. And then
Awesome. Oh, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, in terms of answering questions, it's not just gonna be me. You can ask questions of, Claudia, Breyer, and I are all co-chairs, and we kind of have overseen different things with different EDI initiatives. But we also have Cindy here, who's on the committee and is happy to answer any questions from like a non-co-chair position. Yeah.
Aiden, I have a suggestion. We still have some time, so why don't we do a round of introductions for the people that are happy to answer questions? Does that work for you?
That works for me. Yeah.
So you've talked about being a co-chair. I've introduced myself. So
Yeah.
how about Claudia?
Yeah. Hi guys. I'm Claudia. I'm one of the co-chairs of the EDI committee, and I'm also one of the board of directors, and I also participate on the meetings and workshops committee. Um, yeah, within the EDI committee, I've mostly dealt with the EDI membership or the membership program at the conferences, the working on the anonymous submission box, which right now is complete and we just need to translate it. And then I've also been mostly involved with the translation of a lot of the CHS documents and web pages, along with Daphne Balnier, who I don't think is here. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer any questions related to that. I guess Briar.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Briar Hunter. I am out in Vancouver now. I started out in Ontario, but I'm moved to BC about a year ago. I've been co-chair of the EDI committee for a hot minute now. I don't even remember how long we've been doing this, but it's been an exciting ride. Definitely a fun, committed group of people, but yeah, I've been involved in this survey from the get-go. I remember sending it out. Spent a lot of time very carefully coming up with all these questions, and then I wasn't as involved in the analysis and pulling together of the results, but I've helped kind of putting it into a presentable format. So yeah, here for any questions related to this survey. Really, our goal today was when we sent out this survey to all of you, is we promised that we would come back and share the results with you. And I think we're still hoping to do some more of that analysis, looking at how categories and questions impact each other. And we had started really digging in, and yeah, I know Cindy and Aiden were doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and we realized that really digging into some of those cross-sectional analyses questions was going to take a long time on our limited capacity. So we decided to bring you what we had, and I'm really excited to be able to share this with all of you, even though it's a few years down the road. But yeah, any questions at this point, or even suggestions if we send the survey around again? I think hopefully we'll try to do it every few years or something, so we can see how it changes and grows, and hopefully see some of those challenges lessen and focus our attention. But even suggestions on some of these, how we can use it and what we can do. Again, limited capacity in our committee, so we're also looking for anyone who wants to join and help out. But yeah, that's sorry, I briefly said my name and then I didn't talk about myself at all. I work in herps. I like frogs and everything else, but that's that's me.
That's awesome. Amanda, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Bennett. I am on the EDI committee as well as your CHS president for the next 2 years. Yeah, I don't actually work in herps, so I guess I was probably one of those people who answered in the negative on that question, because I work more broadly in science and health and environmental policy with a not-for-profit in Ottawa, but I do still, I guess, volunteer my time doing herp-related things. I sit on COSEWIC, the Amphibian and Reptile Specialist Subcommittee as well. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer questions from the EDI committee, but we have a lot of representation there. So if you have questions about board decisions, and yeah, I'll echo also Briar's point. Like, if you don't have questions, but you have ideas about future future surveys or what we can do in the future with this type of data, feel free to jump in.
Cindy?
Awesome. And then I think that leaves Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Paskowski. I have been on this committee since its inception, and I was involved with Aiden and Gabby in plowing through the original data set and trying to make it more coherent and combine categories and use the comments to help us interpret the rest of the data set. I definitely am in complete agreement that it needs to be refreshed and we should try doing it again. Another big thing that we did initially was go through the code of conduct. That was quite an undertaking when the committee was struck. That is not really part of this presentation, but that took a lot of thought as well. And in terms of myself, I am a retired professor from the University of Alberta. I am over 70, so I am, I guess, the historic repository here, and perhaps a memory of what it was somewhat like to try and be a non-male scientist in the 70s, for example. And it was quite a different environment then. So happy to be on the committee, and I have enjoyed. And I want to thank Aiden for doing an excellent job and summarizing what we found from the survey. Thanks.
Thanks. Hannah, if it's okay, I'm just gonna hop back in for a quick second. Oh, of course, I just completely forgot why. Oh, I was going to say that the EDI committee did a lot of heavy lifting around thinking about the ethics of the survey, thinking about what to ask, thinking about all of that. There are things around analysis that kind of need an EDI not only an EDI background and knowledge base, right? My background is kind of working in grassroots advocacy groups around things like queer and trans rights and indigenous stuff and indigenous sovereignty stuff, I mean. And then also working on that stuff from a policy side. But so, I might be in a good position to look at how those intersections happen in people's responses, but I am also someone who, has multiple disabilities and is also trying to work and has too many jobs and, like the people who have the knowledge base don't necessarily have the time. And so if there are folks out there who are wanting to, maybe you work with data all day long, and that's not going to surprise me based on the group of people we have here. But you're not wanting to help because you don't have that EDI background, or like you don't struggle with oppression every day. Like, we need you, right? Like, if we send the survey out again, please put your hand up and help us go through that data, because that, like, such a big chunk of the time that this took was around getting through that data. And just the fact that most of us who were working on it just had so many other things going on that prevented it from going quickly. So that's all I'll say is just, if you're not wanting to be an EDI committee member, if you're not wanting to help us send out the survey, that's totally fine. But if you could spare a few hours to help us go through data, if we send it out again, that would be honestly so great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that people will get a theme of that's a great idea. How about you help as we keep going through questions. So we've got a couple comments about suggestions for the next survey. So ask which species are your favorites for issues rather than just taxon favorites is a different fun question. And then support, Alita, this is all from Alita saying that it would be great to have that comparability of the same questions year to year, but maybe add some additional ones. And then Briar, or I don't know if Claudia sees the back end too, have any anonymous questions come in?
Yeah, we've got one. So it says, in terms of barriers to fieldwork, are there any possible mitigation actions that arise from the responses? Yeah, I think this was referring a lot of the like general herpetology, herping barriers that were brought up were related to fieldwork and barriers to being able to participate in fieldwork. Aiden, I don't know if you have thoughts on off the top of your head. I know you like this topic.
Yeah, I think in a dream world, I'd like to give a presentation about reducing fieldwork barriers at some point. Because I think there's probably a lot of experience out there of people who've done it really well and people who also don't realize they've done it really well. But the biggest things are usually around safety. As I said, that takes many forms, right? If you're looking at it from a disability standpoint, then making sure that you're really not cutting corners, right? That there is a plan in place for everything of how to make it happen safely. And that goes a long way to showing people that, might be thinking this is a risk that, okay, it's less risky now, or finding ways to involve people if they can't be involved in everything. That's also a big piece. And then around behavior is also huge. So just ensuring that some of the jokes and conversations that happen aren't assuming anything about anyone. So I know for me, a big challenge has been, being out in the field, having cis men make jokes about, what was the one of them? Like, there was some kind of commentary on how women have to pee in the bush. And then as a trans guy, I was stuck because I was like, well, now, like, how am I gonna pee in the bush with these guys who've just made fun of people who have to squat to pee in the bush? So just being aware of kind of the conversations that are happening and being aware that and making students or employees aware that you never know who's in your group. They might have a disability that they haven't disclosed, and so it might be super helpful for them to know that, like, we're doing this as safely as we possibly could. We haven't just ticked boxes on a safety sheet, we've actually thought about it. And then also, there might be folks who are presenting as one thing and identify as something else, or have different situations going on like that. Yeah, and I think just being aware of conversations is a huge one. I think so if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, but I think the comment about homophobia, some of the comments about homophobia were also people who mentioned fieldwork being an issue. And I think a lot of folks who've been on fieldwork can imagine why. But, again, it comes down to comments and behavior and conversations and what's appropriate, and remembering that, like, it's still a workplace. It's still, unless it's not a workplace, and then you've chosen to hang out with those people. But if it's a workplace, keeping that in mind. It might be a relaxed workplace because you're in the field, but what's appropriate still stands.
We can't hear you, Hannah.
Sorry, mute button. Okay, I can jump in with a few specifics about CHS on field trip things. One thing, Aiden, you said you'd love to do a talk. Please do it. But also, if people know of folks that are fantastic presenters, you can recommend them as a keynote speaker, and we pass that on to the local organizing committee for the conference. If you host a conference, you have the best chance of choosing a keynote speaker, but of course, you can also send in names as suggestions, and the Meetings and Workshops Committee passes on those suggestions from year to year. And then for the CHS field trips themselves, we have updated guiding documents for field trips within the Meetings and Workshops Committee. We pass on guiding documents from year to year. And so there have been additions for things specifically saying, like, offer field trips that are like, and talk about the difficulty of those field trips. And so for this past conference, in-person conference in Sydney for 2024, that was a big push for those fieldwork organizers, which Briar's nodding her head, she was one of them, and they were amazing. But we had a variety of different options for people to choose that had a variety of different terrains to be walking around on, for instance. And yeah, those are a couple that came to mind, but Amanda, you've got your hand up.
Well, just thinking further of like what the organization itself can do, like we can't really change field herping behaviors, but we could offer like policy guidance for other organizations or something. Like if we put it together, the stuff that Aiden was talking about, into like a document that was like, these are the things that you need to think about when you're, you know, when you're in a workspace. Obviously, I guess most workspaces probably have their own like harassment policies, hopefully already in place, but like having something easily grabbed off our website that other people can then use might be a good way forward. Are we taking notes? We should be taking notes. Is anyone okay?
I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I wanted to jump in again. Sorry, I missed Alita, your comment in the chat. You're being wonderfully active. One barrier to fieldwork is the idea of going to remote or exotic places, and another thing that CHS could advocate for are frog watch type backyard projects that have been carried on for many years. And I think the field trips, I think I know the travelogues, sometimes we try and make them exotic and fun species, but the field trips that happen in the Monday of each annual conference try to highlight local areas. And last year, again, a big push on talking about the programs that were happening at the places we were being taken to. And that's another thing I think that's been added to the guiding documents, is a little more clear language around like, consider this when you're planning the field trip. And of course, the field trips were amazing last year because there was a whole team of people really dedicated to doing it, and that's not always possible every year. But yeah, I think there's a few good things, and I love that idea, Amanda. Any other questions from anyone? You can raise your hand. You can use the react button on the bottom of your ribbon.
I'm just gonna
Briar
jump
has
in
thought.
quickly again while we're waiting for questions, just to say that this conversation is all highlighting the juxtaposition of one of the goals we had with delivering the survey was we wanted to figure out what we could do as a society to fix society barriers. Sorry, to fix CHS barriers, and then what we could do to kind of start to instigate change more broadly, just in the fact of having some influence over members in terms of members come to CHS, they attend the conference, they have access to the resources we provide, and so what we can do to kind of assist people who already want to make those changes in their lives outside of CHS to make them. So you are going to get answers around this is what you can do to kind of fix things outside of CHS, and this is what we're doing as CHS. And then I see from Stephanie that a field safety guide by the Trans and Gender Nonconforming Fieldwork Alliance, that might be a useful resource. That is awesome. I didn't know that existed. I've been looking for something like that. That is very cool. Thank you. And then Oh gosh, I clicked save and now everything's happening.
So that I can do it for you, Aiden, if that's
Perfect. Thank you.
yeah. So and then Stephanie dropped that link in the chat so people
Yeah.
can download it on their own, and we'll save the chat as well afterwards. We've got people taking notes, so this is awesome. But Kayla then said it would be useful to provide guidance on creating policies or opportunities for people to report when harassment or issues occur, regardless of pre-existing harassment policies. So great suggestion. Thank you. Breyer, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple comments. One, just to Kayla's point there, again, we're kind of limited to be able to deal with issues that occur at CHS events specifically or related to CHS events. So that's, again, when we went through that code of conduct at the sort of start of this EDI committee was really to focus on what issues that we can cover, and that would be violations directly of our code of conduct. But how we're trying to allow for a space of reporting on violations of our code of conduct specifically is through that anonymous submission box that's in the works. It's so close. And that especially will be, say, at CHS conferences, if an issue occurs and you don't feel safe to approach a board member or one of us EDI sentinels, that will be a space where you can hopefully report it anonymously, and then the EDI committee will have a way of tracking that and addressing what we can. And even if it's just a space for you to report so you feel heard, we've been really intentional about trying to create that space as well. But yeah, really good point. And then just to the prior conversation on resources for fieldwork barriers, I just wanted to say as well, us talking about it is a huge piece of what we can do. The more that we talk about that these barriers exist, have discussions like this, workshops like this, that goes a long way, even if we don't realize it. There's so many people that just don't think about it, don't realize, because they haven't faced these barriers themselves. And so the more that we're kind of discussing it and having these spaces to talk about the barriers and potential mitigations, that's raising awareness to people who are actually in a position to make change out in the broader field. So we've had some discussions and meetings at actual conferences where folks can come together and just chat, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of those. But yeah, just the more we're talking about it and sharing resources, hopefully, yeah, we can put some resources up maybe on our website for open access, but keep talking about it. Ask these questions. Don't keep it a secret. If you need to share it with EDI committee, again, we're limited what we can do, but the more that we talk about it and address it within our groups, hopefully that can spark some broader change outside of CHS. So yeah, Claudia, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think it's difficult managing between what we can do within CHS versus outside of CHS, because a lot of the barriers happen outside of CHS. And really what we can do is education and trying to kind of position workshops or different talks that can educate others or provide resources to educate others. And I think one of the issues that we often come across is this bias in who attends, where we want, where, you know, you might have those who care about making fieldwork more inclusive will search out those opportunities to find documents or, you know, find good practices, but those who are maybe not so aware, they're the ones that are usually kind of perpetuating that barrier. So us doing our best to bring awareness to some of the issues is what we can do. And the anonymous submission box, we have a specific, it took us a while to develop it because of this kind of gray area where it's not within CHS, but we do care about it. And so we've kind of split it up into, are these where the submission box, you're essentially submitting reports of incidents or broader cases of where either someone violated the code of conduct directly, or you experienced something that was not great or maybe a barrier, but it's not necessarily related to the code of conduct or in violation of the code of conduct. And that gives us an idea of what our members are dealing with and what we can put our time and effort towards for talks or workshops or resources. Yeah. Let Hannah, if you want to jump in.
Your mention of workshops made me think of a couple other CHS things. So like I said, you can suggest keynote speakers for the conference in September. You can also suggest workshops. It's great to suggest a topic for a workshop, but if you have a person attached to the topic that could give the workshop, that's even more likely that it'll happen. And if you host a conference, that's the most likely you'll be able to run the workshop you want. But then there's also herpetological hangouts that Pam, who is on the call, started up through our travel into the virtual world, where you could do a webinar. We have the CHS Zoom account, like a webinar type format or a workshop virtually. The Meetings and Workshops Committee manages those, and we're actually so low on capacity that those have paused for the last couple of years. But if we have more people that are interested in hosting these sorts of things again and try to have a person that is willing to do, say, a workshop, we can set up a Zoom link and send out a date and time and things like that. Yeah, for now it's on pause, but if we find some other people or have a really great idea and someone that's really gung-ho to give a presentation, then we can do a herp hangout. Any other anonymous questions? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. We've still got lots of time for questions if people are discussion points, suggestions. You want to say what you typed, Aiden?
Yeah, I can do that. I just didn't want to take up more space. I just said that you know, when we're working on things as the EDI committee, we try to make them kind of models for other individuals or organizations so they can be replicated. They're not perfect models, you know, by any stretch, but they are a stepping off point. They're as good as we've been able to make them in the time we've been able to work on them. So if we do something that you think would be useful for you or for your lab or for whatever, let us know, and we'll talk about it as a committee in terms of what we can release to you. And you know, we are bound by that code of conduct and by our own kind of ethical considerations of the people on the committee, but I think we all kind of have the goal of making this easier for everyone. I'm a big fan of people not having to reinvent the wheel, so yeah, just if you see something and you want it, let us know. And then in the meantime, if we have no other questions yet, I'll just say the version of the survey that we circulated by email is much more in depth. It's a report. So if you have questions after this, or if something's still unclear and you didn't want to ask, you might find the answer in there. And I would say, yeah, if you're part of another organization or whatever, and you want an example of this presentation, use that document. Yeah.
And so, Briar, you just dropped in the report in the chat?
Yes, that should be the one that went out via email, and that link should be accessible, but let us know if it's not. Should be a viewing of the PDF. And yeah, it just has more of the text, a lot of the things that Aiden kind of covered verbally today, and it's just meant if it's easier for you to go through at your own pace and kind of read those details on the screen. Yeah, you can go through that. We will leave that survey box open. I don't know how long. for a while. We didn't discuss an end date, but we'll keep trying to monitor that. And we're gonna keep a record of all the questions here. I believe this whole thing is being recorded, and we will maybe send an email around if we get some more questions in. Our email, Aiden, maybe go to the last slide where our email is. You could also reach out by email to the EDI committee, and you can also reach out to any of us co-chairs directly, and we're happy to answer more questions if they come up, if you need some time just to really sink your teeth into this and ponder it a bit more. This is not a one and done. This is an open conversation going forward. So yeah, this is not your only opportunity to ask questions or give suggestions or share resources. Yeah, keep it coming.
And please ignore the QR code on the report style thing. I just realized I forgot to take it out. So
I had a question. I have a question, Aiden. Could you maybe talk about the biases of the survey? So when it comes to reporting like these diversity estimates and like kind of results, can you speak towards like the bias of like those who actually respond versus those who don't participate?
I sure can. Let me go back to a specific slide. Where are you? Yeah, so this slide in particular, so our question around sexuality and sexual orientation, was very, very interesting. So typically, the rule of thumb is that 10% of the Canadian population identifies as something other than heterosexual. That is what the like guiding principle is. It I think it is likely higher, but we don't know because people don't report. The fact that 30% reported that in an organization that is STEM focused is huge. So usually gender and sexuality questions on surveys related to STEM in any way are underreported because it's not seen as a safe place to report that, regardless of the kind of anonymity of the survey. That's just kind of how things usually go. I've seen like as low as 2%, 5%. It tends to be pretty standard depending on the size of the organization. The bigger it gets, the more that anonymity is kind of trusted, right? If you have an organization of 10,000 people, then like you're less concerned that the person who's reading your survey is going to be able to identify who you are. In an organization of our size, that is really surprising, and to me shows a high level of trust. But some of the other questions, yeah, things like financial barrier. Oh my God, I had it. There we go. In terms of financial barriers, I can't remember how we worded this question, but wording in questions of finances plays a huge role. Like wording in a question around sexuality, you've got a lot of leeway, right? Like I would know, regardless of how you phrase it, I would know which answer is for me to identify that I'm straight or which answer says I'm not. Financial barriers, it's trickier. So generally people do report, there's a higher likelihood that people will report that they're financially doing better than they are. So we know this from surveys about anything that just happened, but especially like market research surveys where they ask your household income. There have been several studies that have shown that people will select the either if they're on the edge of a tier, they'll select the higher tier, or if they're in a tier, they'll sometimes even select the next tier up. And that will be about, like, even if they're just answering a question about a new soda that came out, right? Like, it has nothing to do with their finances, they will select the higher tier up. So how does that affect our survey? Well, there is a pretty good likelihood that that number of 22% is probably higher. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 30. That's a guess though. Like, theoretically it could be 50. We don't know. So how the questions are asked, we did our best to make it very clear. I think our questions are very solid. We took a long time coming up with them, and I think they're great. But any survey is going to have underreporting and overreporting, and there's going to be some precedent you can rely on for what might be underreported or overreported, but it's not set in stone. I don't know if that answered your question. Cindy?
I think that was good. Cindy, you've had your hand up for a little while.
I just wanted to make a comment, and that is, this may be the shape of things to come with the, shall we say, political atmosphere in North America. But in Alberta, which is not known as the most progressive of parts of the country, they are erasing the term EDI from all documents, both provincial and in the university. That's become a term non grata. And I can't remember what kind of namby-pamby term they're replacing with right at the moment. But it is very much in line with a movement away from less respect and sensitivity to diversity. And it is happening right now. And not just in the province, at the university level. We used to have an EDI award for people who were fostering EDI. It looks like that award at the university is going to disappear, for example. So our actions, whatever we're taking now, perhaps to review what we learned a few years ago, are timely and maybe something better addressed sooner than later.
Yeah, and I would like to encourage people on that note, you know, if you are part of other organizations, if we have done anything that you think is useful or helpful or good, trying to get it in place in other organizations is huge. Especially right now, I think we're at this moment where there are a lot of people who are either against EDI initiatives, often because they don't understand them and would actually benefit from them, but that doesn't matter. But there are also a huge number of people who are very, very frustrated and want EDI things to happen, and they don't know how. And they haven't been in this sphere for 20 years like I have, and they haven't been, you know, trying to make these things happen, and they don't know what to do, but they have the energy and they're making time for it. So whatever we can do to put materials in their hands to make that happen, the better. Yeah,